Together we are going to draw the autonomic nervous system. On one page, we're going to show the entirety of the autonomic nervous system with just enough detail to give us a more holistic perspective of what we need going forward in the course. So on one side of the page, we're going to draw the sympathetic nervous system, on the other, the parasympathetic nervous system, and in the center, we start to list out our target tissues, our effectors. It's important to remember what the autonomic nervous system is for. It's the ability of the internal organs of our body to be able to respond to stimuli, different things that might be happening. And so all of these organs are able to either secrete a substance or contract muscles in a particular way that allow them to respond to those changes. For example, you look at the blood vessels there, that's a biggie. The blood vessels have a layer in their wall called the tunica media, a smooth muscle layer that allows for vasoconstriction and vasodilation. These structures decide which parts of the body get blood at any given time. Now you'll notice it's not an exhaustive list. Abdominal organs would include things like your typical digestive organs, the stomach, the liver, the pancreas, but also things like the spleen and the kidneys, which are not part of the digestive system but happen to be in that general area. So we're talking about innervation of these target organs to allow them to specifically respond to physiological changes. So again, to reiterate, that's what the autonomic nervous system does. It innervates these target organs to allow them to secrete at appropriate levels, secrete things or move muscles, contract muscles at an appropriate level to respond to internal stimuli. This happens all the time inside of the body. You're not aware of it. It's autonomic. We're going to start over on the sympathetic side. We're going to draw a spinal cord. And then next to the spinal cord, we are going to draw something that you may not have actually heard of before called a sympathetic trunk. The sympathetic trunk lies on either side of the spinal cord. A very good dissection would allow us to see there's a sympathetic trunk on either side of the spinal cord, sort of buried within the dorsum. And what the sympathetic trunk is basically a very elongated, very long ganglion. It allows for neurons and nerves to leave the spinal cord and then form a synapse with other neurons that are going to go further into the body and make connections. And then there are several ganglia in this region as well that serve the same purpose as the sympathetic trunk, so we draw two of those. Moving on to the parasympathetic side, we are going to draw a spinal cord again. But at the top, we're actually going to draw a portion of the brain. This is not to scale. It's kind of horrifying, but we have to fit it on the paper. So we're going to draw a portion of the brain, and specifically the brainstem, and two parts of the brainstem, specifically the midbrain and the medulla oblongata. The pons, of course, lies in between them, and the pons does have some role in processing. But what we're interested in here is the actual synaptic connections and where the neurons actually arise from. And so it's from the midbrain and the medulla oblongata. Again, we have some ganglia, and we head down the spinal cord all the way down to the distal end, to the most inferior end, and we're going to be dealing with the sacral region, and specifically S2, S3, S4, and thus the parasympathetic branch has neurons coming from the brainstem, and S2, S3, S4, it is called the craniosacral branch of the autonomic nervous system. On the sympathetic side, we are going to be drawing nerves in the lumbar region and the thoracic region. And gosh, I made these so thick they went up too far. Urgh. Anyway, so we start off with T1 at the top, count down to T12, and then into the lumbar region. Remember, there are 5 lumbar nerves, but we only need L1 and L2. So this is the thoracolumbar branch of the autonomic nervous system, T1 through T12, L1 and L2. That is where the neurons arise from on the sympathetic side. Oh yes, and we should really label these ganglia there. All right, so moving on, we're going to switch to a green pen, and we are going to start to draw our synaptic connections. This is what we call a preganglionic neuron. It's the first neuron of 2 in a row. And you'll notice that we go as far as the ganglion. Remember that the ganglion is where a synaptic connection will occur. So we start with one branch going from the midbrain to a ganglion, and then we have 2 different branches coming from the medulla oblongata to ganglia, and then you'll notice that there are branches that appear to be going directly to the lungs and the heart. There are actually ganglia inside of there. They are basically within the walls of those organs. So there's always going to be a ganglion. So this is what we call our preganglionic fiber, our preganglionic neuron. And those little arrows there, those little sideways V's, are going to be showing where the neuron begins. So the dendrite basically, ending with an axon terminal, if you will. Now on the sympathetic side, remember that T1 through L2, they are all involved. So we have little dendrites drawn into each and every single one of those little boxes. And we're going to start to draw our lines out from there, our axons. Our axons are going to be penetrating, all of them are actually going to be penetrating into the sympathetic trunk and making synapses within that very long ganglion. At the top here, the T1 through T4 all sort of arise superiorly. So they all kind of penetrate horizontally and then they begin to connect in a superior way. And this forms a plexus of neurons, of nerves. Eventually, and we're not going to be getting into the details of the plexi or the plexuses, but we're going to be drawing from here. Okay, so you'll see basically, and then I'm going to go all the way down to the L1 and L2, and we're going to be drawing them going directly into this ganglion. And I forgot one synaptic connection that I'll be drawing later on. And we're sticking with our green marker for a particular reason, which we'll be talking about in the next lecture. Now, I found that T12, different pictures and different text seem to show it going in different ways. Some of them showing it only branching superiorly into this little nerve here, into this little network of fibers. But other ones show it branching downwards, so I thought I would cover myself and just do both. They're all sort of interconnected anyway. They sort of weave together. All right, so you can see that these ones all connect together. They're actually going to punch through this ganglion. And this is the first actual target cell that we're drawing a connection directly with. The adrenal medulla is a very special target organ. It only receives input directly from the spinal cord. It's the only one that receives input directly from the spinal cord. Everything else would be preganglionic, and then we'll also have postganglionic neuron. Now I'm going to begin to draw the postganglionic neurons, and you'll see this is a fairly simple affair. We simply draw another dendrite, kind of talking to that axon terminal, and then showing the target cell that it actually innervates. So these that I'm drawing here, the second one in a row, the second one in a line, are going to be our postganglionic neurons. On the parasympathetic side, the preganglionic neurons tend to be very long. And then the postganglionic neurons tend to be very short, and of course they are bringing information from very close to their target organs directly into the organs. All right, so that's the parasympathetic side. You're always going to see two neurons in a row, preganglionic and postganglionic, all green. Now on the sympathetic side, we're going to start with a postganglionic neuron, which is in fact green, and it's the only one. The neuron that leads to the sweat glands is also green. And again, we'll talk about that next time. Now we switch to a red marker. All the rest of our postganglionic neurons are going to be red. I want you to notice two things as we draw here. One of them being that some of those target organs, some of those target structures have innervation from both sympathetic and parasympathetic branches of the ANS. This is called dual innervation, D-U-A-L, and is oftentimes antagonistic, but sometimes is cooperative, depending on the circumstances. The other thing to notice is that on the sympathetic side, we have long postganglionic neurons and very short preganglionic neurons, quite the opposite of the parasympathetic side. Oops, I had to switch to green and draw in one more preganglionic neuron that I had forgotten to draw in there so that I could complete the picture and draw our last postganglionic neuron. And there we go, two neurons in a row. preganglionic in green, postganglionic in red, with a few exceptions.